Indigenous women live in Canada a life that includes threats of violence so frequent and severe that Amnesty International has called it a human rights crisis. That is the legacy of colonialism in Canada.
That was the Prime Minister addressing the UN General Assembly this afternoon and laying bare Canada's historic troubled relationship with its Indigenous peoples. Between that speech today and Parliament's return on Monday, there's lots to talk about. An at-issue is here. Althea was at the UN for Justin Trudeau's speech. She's still in New York tonight. Chantal is in Montreal. Andrew is in Toronto. So last year's speech trumpeted Canada is back. This year seemed to say Canada is bad, or has been bad, but we're doing better, and we hope that things can get a whole lot better in the near future. Althea, let me start with you because you heard it in person. What did you hear in the speech, and what did you see in the room in terms of response?
Well, it was a pretty packed room, actually. There were a couple of people taking selfies of themselves with the Prime Minister in the background. The Russian delegation was out in full force. The Americans only had about 3 people there, but it was mostly he had a slot in the middle of the day, and so typically the people who are speaking after him tend to be in that room. So it was pretty packed. I don't know that it was anything beyond the fact that this is a timetable and there's a curiosity with Mr. Trudeau, like his press conference was packed as well. But with regards to the speech, it was a very inward-looking speech. He even talked about the tax changes that he wants to bring forward in Ottawa. He talked about the Canada Child Benefit. And yes, he did talk, interestingly enough, kind of like airing Canada's dirty laundry on the world stage, about the relationship with Indigenous people. But he didn't talk about the things that you would expect a leader of the government to talk on the foreign stage. He didn't mention peacekeeping. He didn't talk about Venezuela. He didn't talk about North Korea. He didn't talk about even climate change in a way of addressing the concerns that other leaders who took the stage before him had raised.
Okay.
So
let's come back to some of those in a little bit more detail. I want to get Andrew's overall takeaway as well as you listened.
Well, Althea is certainly right that some of it was for domestic consumption. I think a lot of it also, though, is a school of thought would contend, shall we say, that if you're running for the Security Council seat and you're trying to impress upon the collection of mostly third world dictatorships in the General Assembly, how sensitive you are to their concerns, it wouldn't hurt to show that, we have sins as well, and we understand that not everybody can live up to their ideals of human rights, etc. So it may be that by dwelling at such length on some of our worst past and perhaps present indiscretions, or whatever the right word is, sins, that they would let those states know, we're not going to be too judgmental about you. We're not going to be too high and mighty. We're not going to be too holier than thou. And that may be an effective message. I guess for some of us, you would say, are we that concerned about getting a Supreme Court, a Security Council seat, that we're going to put to one side some of our traditional interests and values and not talk about some of the things that we might have talked about in a General Assembly address? Okay.
And Chantal, as you listen, what stood out for you?
Well, I don't think Justin Trudeau needs to talk about climate change at the UN for people to know where he stands on that. He's gone to a multitude of conferences and signaled that he was different from his predecessor and engaged. I think there was, on top of the people waiting to speak, a lot of curiosity about what he would have to say, in part because he is next door neighbor to Donald Trump, and in part because he is a celebrity. I'm not sure that I agree that it is to talk about domestic issues or indiscretions for Canada Prime Minister to talk about Canada's relationship with First Nations. This is an issue that has surfaced again and again at the UN, almost always because Canada's First Nations have brought their case there and usually gotten a hearing, and Canada has always played defense. So I think for many followers at the UN of Canada, this was a fresh approach and a very different speech from what they had heard in the past.
In terms of strategy, though, because again, Althea, you've seen in person some of those sideline meetings, and you've seen the kinds of informal campaign going on for this coveted Security Council seat for 2021. This domestic focus, I mean, was it not folly to ignore the things that Andrew mentioned and that you have mentioned, North Korea, Donald Trump, the changing world? What does that do to the campaign?
Well, two things. One, I actually think this speech is more about a domestic audience, and in fact, it even be seen as sort of paving the way for election chatter. Like these are long-term goals that Justin Trudeau has in terms of rebuilding Canada's relationship with Indigenous peoples. And I think in 2019, they're going to go to the people and say, we still have a lot of work to do. Don't vote for the Conservatives, don't vote for the New Democrats, let us get this type of stuff done. With regards to the UN Security Council seat, Canada's campaign actually hasn't even started. Mm-hmm. There are no real meetings specifically dedicated to this. There are no activities dedicated to this that have yet to happen. Canada says that it is abiding by this diplomatic protocol that you wait until the election round for the previous round, so sometime around probably June next year, when the Security Council vote the General Assembly vote for the Security Council seat in 2019, 2020 will happen. After that, Canada says it will begin its campaign full throttle, trying to bring those UN ambassadors to Canada, whining and dining them, trying to convince them to vote for
But
Canada.
even though it's still unformally underway, did they bolster Chantal or not today with that speech?
I think we need to get into context the reality that Justin Trudeau is different from other prime ministers that we've had in the past. He is, in international circles, a rock star. He doesn't need to go to the UN and say, hey, here I am. I know you never noticed me. You missed me during the group picture at the summit because I was away at the boys' room. He also has very good relationships. This is a country that today had a trade deal that was ratified with the European Union, something that is bound to be noticed. He's playing the progressive trade card, which goes down well with a number of countries. We're negotiating with China a trade deal. So if you look at how we line up votes, it's not in that room today that most of the legwork gets done, but at the climate summits, at all those trade negotiations, at welcoming Syrian refugees, go down the list. And I don't think that you can look at that speech and say, oh my God, our campaign did not get off well today.
No, I'm not saying that. I mean, certainly Justin Trudeau has a reputation worldwide, and certainly much of the campaigning for the seat will take place in back rooms, absolutely. But I don't think we can divorce the opportunity of speaking to the General Assembly who will vote on this from the campaign. I think that would be foolish. As I say, I think it may well be helping the cause. I just wonder at what cost. I'm not sure that the prize is worth the gain. A seat on the Security Council is a great, bragging right. The actual effectiveness of either the Security Council or Canada's seat in it is another matter.
Chantal?
But what interest would you have wanted Canada to advance today on that stage?
Well, it's not just interest, it's also values. It's also playing a part. If you're going to go on the world stage and not talk about the events that are actually happening on the world stage, then you are, it's not the end of the world, but you're passing up an opportunity for the very thing that supposedly we're there to do, which is to influence events and to influence the debate.
And last word to you on this, Althea.
I was just going to say, I agree with Andrew on this. I think that if you're going to tell the world that you want to have a louder voice, maybe you should tell them what that voice actually is, and we haven't done that.
Okay. A lot of things to talk about, but I want to talk about what we're going to find out next Sunday. That's when we learn the results of the first round of voting in the NDP leadership race, of course. The week began with the candidates showcase, and again, to remind, there are 4 in the running. Nikki Ashton, Guy Caron, we also have Charlie Angus and Jagmeet Singh. Chantal, how is the race looking to you in these final days?
To me, it looks like Jagmeet Singh has captured a lot of media attention and some very significant caucus support and earned a lot of attention, including in Quebec, where, as you know, he was attacked by the leader of the Bloc Québécois for being a turban-wearing Sikh. And the assertion by Martine Ouellette is that this is the radical religious left that is trying to impose its agenda on Quebec values. I think the Bloc Québécois actually wants Mr. Singh to win the leadership because they believe, rightly or wrongly, that they can score off points off the NDP on that. But I also think that those attacks actually helped Jagmeet Singh with the NDP base.
So let me just jump in and play for everyone in case they missed those comments from Martine Ouellette. Here she is saying essentially that he is too religious for Quebec. Here's part of her news conference.
Actually, it's not the turban itself. It's what it means. In Quebec, what we decided in the 60s, and it's a long time ago, we decided to separate religion and the state. And that's really important for us.
So, Althea, does that, can that work for Jagmeet Singh? Does it mesh with the progressive social democratic values that are being talked about there? Can he sell in the province?
Well, his response to that is that he is convinced that he can convince Quebecers that he shares their social democratic values. And he's had really nice things to say about Guy Caron, the only Quebec MP who's in the leadership race, who actually raised the whole Bill 62 question with regards to Quebec and identity and whether or not the NDP should intervene or condemn the province's National Assembly if it voted on legislation that a lot of the NDP base would feel is basically racist. Mm-hmm. His response to that, similarly to his response to the viral video, have done nothing, I think, but help him. I wholeheartedly agree with Chantal on this. And the best thing that happened for Martine Ouellette on Monday, when actually I asked her that question, is that nobody was talking about Martine Ouellette or the Bloc Québécois either. And now all of a sudden people are mentioning the Bloc Québécois. So I think that she had a good day, and I think that he had a good day.
And Andrew, last word to you on this, because on this particular point, but also just how important Quebec is for the NDP. I mean, certainly that was the orange wave building there for Jack Layton. Now support is dwindling for the party, some of the seats in jeopardy. How important is the province as a factor?
Quebec is important to the NDP. The question is whether the NDP is important to Quebec. And I'm not sure that any of the candidates is really going to be able to set hearts afire in Quebec. You look at Guy Caron running as the candidate from Quebec. It's not as if he's taken the province by storm or produced a lot of new memberships, et cetera. So when you look at this, with Singh having, 47,000 new members, it is hard to see how anybody can catch him unless you get a kind of an anybody but Singh movement going amongst the other candidates, and we'll see whether that materializes.
Okay. October the 1st, those first voting results. What a pleasure. My first at issue. Thank you for making it easy for me as I listen to you. Chantal and Andrew and Althea in New York. Thanks to all three once again.